So, I was driving late at night, all alone on this deserted highway. My car started acting up, making these weird noises, and then it just died on me. I pulled over to the side of the road, feeling kind of panicked. It was pitch black outside, and there wasn't another soul in sight. I tried calling for help, but my phone had no signal. So, I just sat there in my car, waiting and hoping that someone would come by soon. But as time passed, I started to feel this creeping sense of unease. That's when I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned to look, but there was nothing there. Just darkness stretching out into the night. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. But then I heard footsteps, soft and slow, coming from somewhere out in the darkness. My heart started pounding in my chest as I realized I wasn't alone out here. I locked the doors and huddled down in my seat, trying to make myself as small as possible. But the footsteps kept getting closer and closer until they were right outside my car. I held my breath, waiting for whatever was out there to make its move. And then, suddenly, there was a knock on my window. I jumped out of my skin, my whole body trembling with fear. I slowly turned to look, and there, standing outside my car, was a man. He was tall and thin, with a face that was hidden in the shadows. But I could feel his eyes boring into me, cold and calculating. I didn't know what to do. Should I roll down the window and ask for help? Or should I just stay quiet and hope he goes away? But before I could make up my mind, he spoke. "Need a hand?" he said, his voice low and smooth. But there was something about it that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't answer, just stared at him, trying to figure out if I could trust him or not. But then he smiled, this twisted grin that made my blood run cold. "Come on," he said, gesturing for me to open the door. "I'll help you out." I wanted to scream, to run as far away from him as I could. But I was frozen in place, paralyzed with fear. And then, suddenly, he reached for the door handle, and I knew I had to do something. With a surge of adrenaline, I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal and tore away from him as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was miles away, safe and sound. I was driving alone, relying on my GPS to guide me through unfamiliar territory. Everything seemed fine at first, but then things started to go wrong. The GPS led me down a series of increasingly isolated and desolate back roads, far away from civilization. At first, I didn't think much of it. Glitches happen, right? But as the roads grew narrower and more treacherous, I started to feel a creeping sense of unease. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that I just needed to trust the GPS and keep following its instructions. But the roads it was leading me down were getting worse by the minute, winding through dense forests and steep hillsides with no sign of civilization in sight. I started to panic, wondering if I had made a mistake by relying on technology instead of my own instincts. But it was too late to turn back now. The GPS had me firmly in its grip, leading me further and further into the unknown. As I drove on, the feeling of isolation only grew stronger. I felt like I was the only person in the world, surrounded by nothing but darkness and silence. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, disaster struck. The road ahead of me suddenly disappeared, replaced by a yawning chasm that seemed to stretch on forever. My heart pounding in my chest, I slammed on the brakes and skidded to a stop just inches from the edge. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring into the abyss and wondering how I was ever going to get out of this mess. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the chasm vanished, leaving me shaken but unarmed. I didn't waste any time getting out of there, putting as much distance between myself and that cursed road as possible. But even as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, waiting for me to make another wrong turn. It was a typical evening as my partner and I drove down the desolate highway, the headlights illuminating the dark road ahead. Suddenly, we spotted a figure on the side of the road, huddled in the shadows. Concerned, we slowed down and pulled over to see if they needed assistance. As we approached, the figure appeared to be injured, clutching at their side and groaning in pain. My partner and I exchanged worried glances before deciding to stop and offer our help. After all, it was the least we could do. As we got closer, the figure looked up at us with pleading eyes, begging for assistance. Without hesitation, we stepped out of the car and approached cautiously, unsure of what we might find. The air was thick with tension as we drew nearer, the only sound the distant rumble of passing cars. But as we reached out to offer our help, something didn't feel right. The figure's movements seemed too deliberate, too calculated. And then, in an instant, everything became clear. We had walked right into a trap. Suddenly, from out of the darkness, a group of masked individuals emerged, surrounding us with weapons drawn. My heart raced as I realized what was happening. We had stumbled upon a group of highway robbers, using the injured person as bait to lure unsuspecting victims. Panic surged through me as the reality of the situation sank in. My partner and I were completely outnumbered, our only hope of survival to somehow outsmart our attackers and make a break for it. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I glanced at my partner, silently communicating our plan. Without a word, we sprang into action, using every ounce of strength and cunning we possessed to fend off our assailants. It was a chaotic blur of punches, kicks, and desperate struggles as we fought tooth and nail to defend ourselves. In the midst of the chaos, I felt a surge of fear and uncertainty, unsure if we would make it out alive. But despite the odds stacked against us, we refused to give up. With sheer determination and a bit of luck, we managed to overpower our attackers and escape into the night, our hearts pounding with adrenaline as we fled to safety. As we drove away from the scene, the gravity of what had just happened began to sink in. We had narrowly escaped a potentially deadly encounter, but the memory of that night would haunt us forever. In the days that followed, my partner and I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. Every passing car and shadowy figure on the side of the road filled us with dread, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked just beyond the surface. But despite the lingering fear, we knew that we were lucky to have made it out alive. So, me and my friends were driving late at night, just looking for a place to grab a bite to eat. We were out in the middle of nowhere, nothing around for miles except for this creepy-looking diner we spotted on the side of the road. At first, we thought it was perfect. We were hungry, tired from driving, and this place seemed like it might have some decent food. But as soon as we stepped inside, something felt off. The diner was dimly lit, with flickering fluorescent lights casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. The air was heavy with the smell of grease and stale coffee, and there was this eerie silence hanging over the place. We hesitated for a moment, but then the waitress came over and gestured for us to sit down. She was old, with tired eyes and a fake smile plastered on her face. She led us to a booth near the back and handed us some menus, but when we opened them up, there was only one thing listed, special of the day. We shrugged it off, figuring maybe it was just a small-town diner thing. But then we noticed the other customers. They were all staring at us, their eyes following our every move with this intense, almost predatory gaze. We tried to ignore them, focusing on our conversation and trying to make light of the situation. But the longer we sat there, the more uneasy we became. There was something about the way they were looking at us, like they knew something we didn't. And then, things started to get really weird. The waitress brought out our food, but when we looked down at our plates, it wasn't anything we ordered. It was this strange, unidentifiable meat sitting in a pool of congealed gravy. We tried to ask her about it, but she just smiled and said, "Enjoy your meal." And that's when we knew something was seriously wrong. We tried to leave, but when we got to the door, it was locked tight. Panic started to set in as we realized we were trapped in this place with no way out. That's when things went from bad to worse. The other customers started closing in on us, their faces twisted into these grotesque masks of hunger and malice. We backed away, trying to find some way to defend ourselves, but there was nowhere to run. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we heard a voice. It was coming from the kitchen, low and raspy, but somehow familiar. It was the cook, the one who had been preparing our food. He emerged from the shadows, a large butcher knife glinting in his hand. But instead of attacking us, he turned on the other customers, slashing and stabbing with a fury that was both terrifying and exhilarating. We didn't waste any time. We ran for the door, pushing past the chaos and carnage behind us. And when we finally burst out into the night, we didn't stop running until we were miles away from that godforsaken diner. I don't know what happened in there, or why those people were trying to hurt us. But I do know one thing: I'll never be able to look at a roadside diner the same way again. I was driving down this long stretch of highway, just trying to get home after a long day of work. It was late, and I was tired, so when I saw the sign for a rest stop, I figured it was a good time to pull over and stretch my legs. But when I got there, something felt off. The place was deserted, like completely empty. I mean, there were no other cars in the parking lot, and I didn't see anyone inside the building. I shrugged it off and parked my car anyway. I got out and walked around a bit, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that was creeping over me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I walked up to the building and pushed open the door. It creaked loudly on its hinges, echoing through the empty space. The inside was dimly lit, with flickering fluorescent lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" But there was no answer, just the sound of my own voice bouncing back at me. I started to feel really uneasy then, like I shouldn't be there. But something inside me told me to keep going, to explore and see what I could find. I walked down the hallway, passing rows of empty vending machines and dusty tables. It was like the place had been abandoned for years, even though it looked like it had been used recently. I turned a corner and found myself in a darkened room. There were shelves lining the walls, filled with all sorts of random stuff, books, toys, even old clothes. But what caught my eye was the table in the center of the room. There was something sitting on it, something that looked out of place among all the other junk. I walked over to get a closer look, my heart pounding in my chest. And that's when I saw it, a small, wooden box, just sitting there all by itself. I reached out and picked it up, feeling a shiver run down my spine. It was heavy and cold to the touch, like it had been sitting there for a long time. I opened the box slowly, not sure what I would find inside. And that's when I saw them, a stack of old photographs, all black and white and faded with age. I picked one up and studied it closely. It was a picture of a group of people, standing outside the rest stop with big smiles on their faces. But as I looked closer, I noticed something strange about the picture. There was something lurking in the background, something dark and shadowy that shouldn't have been there. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized what I was looking at. It was like something out of a horror movie, a ghostly figure, watching the people in the photograph with cold, empty eyes. I dropped the picture and stumbled back, feeling sick to my stomach. I knew then that I had to get out of there, that I had to leave before whatever was haunting that place found me too. I ran back to my car, not stopping until I was miles away from that abandoned rest stop. It was a warm summer evening, and my friends and I were cruising down the highway, the radio blasting and laughter filling the car. We were on our way back from a weekend camping trip, reminiscing about the fun we'd had and the memories we'd made. As we drove, we spotted a lone figure standing on the side of the road, their thumb outstretched in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker. Without thinking, we slowed down and pulled over, eager to lend a helping hand to someone in need. The hitchhiker climbed into the back seat, offering a grateful smile and a quiet thank you as they settled in. We exchanged introductions and chatted amicably as we continued on our journey, enjoying the company of our unexpected passenger. But as we drove further down the road, a sense of unease began to settle over the car. It started with a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a tension that hung heavy in the air, palpable yet indefinable. I glanced in the rearview mirror, my heart skipping a beat as I realized that the hitchhiker was no longer there. In their place was an empty seat, the fabric still warm from their presence but devoid of any trace of their existence. Panic surged through me as I frantically searched the car, hoping against hope that our passenger had simply moved to another seat or stepped out for a moment. But there was no sign of them, no explanation for their sudden disappearance. My friends and I exchanged worried glances, our minds racing with fear and confusion. Had we imagined the hitchhiker? Had they simply vanished into thin air, leaving us to wonder what had happened to them? As we continued down the road, a chill settled over the car, the warmth of the summer night suddenly replaced by an icy cold that seemed to seep into our bones. Despite the sweltering heat outside, we couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had taken hold of us. We drove in silence, each lost in our own thoughts as we grappled with the inexplicable events of the evening. The radio, once a source of laughter and camaraderie, now seemed to taunt us with its cheerful melodies, a stark contrast to the fear that gripped our hearts. Hours passed, but the sense of unease only grew stronger with each passing mile. We tried to shake off the feeling, to convince ourselves that we were simply overreacting to a strange coincidence. But deep down, we knew that something was terribly wrong. As we approached our destination, a wave of relief washed over us, the sight of familiar surroundings offering a glimmer of hope in the darkness. But even as we pulled into the driveway and stepped out of the car, the feeling of dread lingered, a silent reminder of the horror we had experienced. We parted ways that night, each retreating to the safety of our own homes, eager to put the events of the evening behind us. But try as we might, we couldn't escape the lingering sense of unease that followed us, a constant reminder of the inexplicable disappearance of the hitchhiker. In the days that followed, we tried to rationalize what had happened, searching for any logical explanation to ease our troubled minds. But no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't shake the feeling that we had encountered something beyond our understanding, something that defied explanation. And so, we resigned ourselves to the fact that some mysteries are simply not meant to be solved, some horrors too terrifying to be fully understood. I stopped at a gas station on my way home from work, tired and eager to get back to the comfort of my own home. As I pumped gas into my car, a stranger approached me, their face hidden beneath the shadow of a baseball cap. They whispered a warning, their voice low and urgent, but I barely paid them any mind. I dismissed their words as paranoia, chalking it up to the late hour and my own exhaustion. But as I got back into my car and started the engine, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me. It was as if a dark cloud had descended, casting a shadow over my otherwise ordinary evening. I drove cautiously, my eyes darting nervously to the rearview mirror as I navigated the quiet streets. Every sound, every movement seemed to set my heart racing, my imagination running wild with possibilities. As I approached a deserted stretch of road, my car suddenly jerked to a halt, the engine sputtering and dying beneath me. Panic surged through me as I realized that something was terribly wrong. I tried to restart the engine, but to no avail. It was as if my car had suddenly decided to give up on me, leaving me stranded in the darkness with no way to escape. I glanced around nervously, my senses on high alert as I searched for any sign of danger. But the night was still and silent, the only sound the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. And then, as if on cue, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching from the darkness. My blood ran cold as I realized that I was now alone, that someone or something was out there in the night, watching and waiting. I scrambled to lock the doors, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. But even as I did, I knew that it was already too late, that whatever was out there had already found me. I sat in the darkness, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I waited for the inevitable. Minutes passed like hours, each second stretching out into an eternity as I braced myself for whatever horror awaited me. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the footsteps stopped. The night fell silent once more, the only sound the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest as I listened for any sign of danger. But there was nothing, only the stillness of the night and the oppressive weight of my own fear. Slowly, cautiously, I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed for help. It felt like an eternity before someone answered, their voice a welcome relief in the darkness. I told them what had happened, my words tumbling out in a rush as I tried to explain the terror that had gripped me. They promised to send help, to send someone to rescue me from the nightmare that had become my reality. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the headlights of a car appeared in the distance, their beams cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. Relief flooded through me as I realized that help was finally on the way, that I would soon be safe from whatever horror lurked in the night. As the car pulled up beside me, I stumbled out of my own vehicle, my legs weak and trembling beneath me. The driver stepped out, their face hidden beneath the shadow of a baseball cap, and for a moment, my heart stopped in my chest. But then they spoke, their voice soft and reassuring, and I knew that I was safe. They helped me into their car, their presence a comforting presence in the darkness as we drove away from the nightmare that had become my reality. And as we left the deserted stretch of road behind us, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to me that night. What had caused my car to fail, and who had been lurking in the darkness, waiting to strike. But for now, all that mattered was that I was safe, that I was alive, and that I had escaped the horror that had threatened to consume me. It was just supposed to be a harmless prank, something to pass the time on a boring Friday night. We gathered at Jake's house, a group of teenagers looking for a thrill in the suburbs. Someone had the idea to play a prank on passing drivers, nothing serious, just a little harmless fun. We grabbed some eggs and toilet paper from Jake's pantry, giggling like kids as we plotted our mischief. The plan was simple. We'd hide in the bushes by the side of the road and wait for a car to pass by. Then, we'd leap out and pelt the unsuspecting driver with eggs before making a quick getaway. We thought it would be funny, a chance to blow off some steam and have a laugh at someone else's expense. But as we crouched in the darkness, waiting for our first victim to come along, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me. When a car finally approached, we sprang into action, hurling eggs with reckless abandon as we laughed and cheered. But as the car screeched to a halt and the driver emerged, I felt a knot of fear form in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't just any driver, it was Mr. Johnson, our neighbor from down the street, a man known for his short temper and no-nonsense attitude. He was furious, his face contorted with rage as he stormed towards us, his fists clenched at his sides. We scattered like scared rabbits, running as fast as we could through the darkness as Mr. Johnson gave chase. But no matter how fast we ran, he was always right behind us, his footsteps echoing in the night as he pursued us relentlessly. We ducked into alleyways and side streets, desperate to shake him off our trail, but he was always there, his anger fueling his determination to catch us. It was like something out of a nightmare, a never-ending game of cat and mouse with no way out. As the night wore on, exhaustion began to set in, our legs heavy and our breath coming in ragged gasps. But still, We pushed on, driven by fear and adrenaline as we raced through the deserted streets, our pursuer never more than a few steps behind. Finally, after what felt like hours of running, we stumbled into a deserted park, our lungs burning and our hearts pounding in our chests. We collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath as we waited for Mr. Johnson to catch up to us. But to our surprise, he never came. We waited in tense silence, our ears straining for any sign of his approach, but there was nothing, only the sound of our own frantic breathing echoing in the darkness. Slowly, cautiously, we made our way back to Jake's house, our nerves still on edge as we crept through the silent streets. We didn't speak, didn't dare to acknowledge the terror that still gripped us, even now that the danger had passed. As we reached Jake's front door, we exchanged nervous glances, a silent agreement passing between us. We would never speak of this night again, never mention the terror that had chased us through the streets. I was driving down this dark, deserted road, just trying to get home after a long day at work. It was late, and I was tired, so I was eager to get home and hit the sack. But then, out of nowhere, I felt this jolt, like I'd hit something in the road. My car started shaking, and I realized something was seriously wrong. I pulled over to the side of the road and got out to take a look. That's when I saw it, a spike strip, laid out across the road, puncturing my tires and leaving me stranded. My heart started racing as I looked around, trying to figure out what was going on. And that's when I saw them, a group of men, emerging from the shadows with sinister smiles on their faces. I knew right away that they weren't there to help me. They were criminals, out to cause trouble and do God knows what else. I tried to back away, to get back into my car and drive off, but they were already closing in on me, blocking my path and cutting off any chance of escape. I felt a surge of panic rising up inside me as they advanced, their footsteps echoing through the silent night. I knew I was in serious trouble, that I had to do something, and fast. I looked around, desperate for anything I could use to defend myself. But there was nothing, just darkness stretching out in every direction. I realized then that I was completely at their mercy, that there was nothing I could do to stop them from doing whatever they wanted to me. I felt a sickening sense of dread wash over me as they got closer, their faces twisted with malice and cruelty. I knew I was in for a world of hurt, that I might not make it out of this alive. But then, just as they were about to reach me, I heard the sound of approaching sirens in the distance. I felt a surge of relief flood through me as I realized that help was on the way. The criminals must have heard it too, because they hesitated, glancing nervously at each other before turning and disappearing back into the darkness. I watched them go, feeling a mixture of fear and relief swirling inside me. I knew I'd narrowly escaped something truly terrible that night, that I'd been lucky to get out of there in one piece. I waited until the police arrived, telling them everything that had happened. They took my statement and promised to do everything they could to catch the criminals and bring them to justice. And as I sat there in the back of the police car, watching the lights flash by outside, I couldn't help but feel grateful to be alive, grateful to have escaped the clutches of those dangerous men. We were on our way home, tired after a long day of sightseeing, when the traffic on the main road came to a standstill. Frustrated and eager to get home, we decided to take a detour through a desolate stretch of road to avoid the congestion. At first, everything seemed fine. The road was empty, the sky was clear, and we were making good time. But then, as we rounded a bend, we saw him, a man standing in the middle of the road, his eyes fixed on us as we approached. I felt a shiver run down my spine as we got closer. There was something about him that just didn't sit right with me. He was tall and gaunt, with a wild look in his eyes that sent a chill down my spine. As we passed him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him standing there, watching us as we drove away. It sent a shiver down my spine, but I tried to push the thought out of my mind and focus on getting home. But then, just when I thought we were in the clear, we saw him again, standing on the side of the road up ahead, his figure illuminated by the headlights of our car. My heart skipped a beat as we approached, and I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I told my partner to keep driving, but they were frozen in place, staring at the man with wide eyes. As we passed him, I could see the fear in their face, mirrored in my own. We both knew something was seriously wrong. I tried to reassure them that everything would be okay, but deep down, I knew we were in trouble. The man seemed to be following us, popping up at random intervals along the road, his presence growing more menacing with each passing moment. I urged my partner to call the police, but there was no signal out here in the middle of nowhere. We were completely on our own, with no one to help us if things went south. As we drove on, the tension in the car grew thicker with each passing mile. Every shadow seemed to conceal the man's lurking presence, every sound sending us into a panic. We were trapped in a nightmare of our own making, with no way out and no one to turn to for help. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, we rounded a bend and saw him standing in the middle of the road ahead, blocking our path. My heart pounded in my chest as we approached, his figure looming larger and larger in the darkness. I told my partner to stop the car, but they were frozen in place, their hands gripping the steering wheel in a death grip. I could see the fear in their eyes, mirrored in my own, as we braced ourselves for whatever was about to happen. But then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the man vanished into thin air, leaving us alone on the empty road. We sat there for a moment, stunned and shaken, before my partner finally found the courage to hit the gas and get us out of there. We were driving home from a family vacation, the car filled with laughter and tired smiles as we reminisced about our adventures. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the empty highway as we made our way through the deserted countryside. Suddenly, a pair of headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, speeding towards us from behind. I felt a chill run down my spine as the car drew closer, the sound of its engine growing louder with each passing second. Before we could react, the car pulled alongside us, blocking our path and forcing us to slow to a stop. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched in horror as armed men emerged from the car, their faces hidden behind masks as they approached us with guns drawn. We were frozen with fear as they surrounded our car, their voices muffled by the sound of the wind as they demanded that we hand over our valuables. My parents tried to reason with them, but the men were relentless, their guns glinting in the fading light as they threatened us with violence if we didn't comply. I felt sick to my stomach as they rifled through our belongings, tearing apart our suitcases and bags in search of anything of value. They seemed to grow more agitated with each passing moment, their demands growing more frantic as they realized that we didn't have much to give. Finally, one of the men turned to my parents with a sinister grin, his eyes cold and calculating as he outlined their demands. They wanted a ransom, a large sum of money in exchange for our safe release. If we didn't pay up, they threatened to take us hostage and demand even more money from our loved ones. My parents were horrified, their faces pale with fear as they tried to negotiate with the men. But it was no use, they were determined to get what they wanted, no matter the cost. As the standoff dragged on, I felt a sense of hopelessness wash over me. We were alone on a deserted highway, miles from help, with no way to escape our captors. It seemed like we were doomed to become pawns in their twisted game, trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. But then, just when all hope seemed lost, we heard the sound of approaching sirens in the distance. The men's faces paled with fear as they realized that their time was running out, their grip on us weakening with each passing moment. In a desperate bid for freedom, my parents seized the opportunity to overpower our captors, fighting tooth and nail to break free from their grasp. The struggle was intense, the air thick with tension as we fought for our lives against the armed assailants. Finally, with the help of the arriving police, we managed to subdue the men and bring them to justice. It was a terrifying ordeal, one that would haunt us for the rest of our lives, but in the end, we emerged victorious, our family safe and sound once more. As we drove away from the scene, the flashing lights of the police cars fading into the distance behind us, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. We had survived the ordeal, against all odds, and now we were free to return to the safety of our home, grateful to be alive and together once more. It was late at night, and I was driving home from a friend's house when I noticed something strange up ahead. There was an abandoned car parked on the side of the road, its hazard lights flashing in the darkness. My heart skipped a beat as I slowed down to take a closer look, feeling a sense of unease creeping over me. Pulling over to the side of the road, I parked my car a safe distance away from the abandoned vehicle and turned off my engine. Stepping out into the chilly night air, I cautiously approached the car, my senses on high alert for any signs of danger. As I got closer, I could see that the car's windows were rolled down, and there were signs of a struggle inside. The seats were torn and the dashboard was covered in blood, sending a shiver down my spine. It was clear that something terrible had happened here, and I felt a knot of fear tighten in my stomach. Ignoring the voice in my head telling me to turn back, I pressed on, determined to uncover the truth behind the abandoned car. I checked the surrounding area for any sign of the driver, but there was no one in sight. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. My mind raced with possibilities as I tried to piece together what had happened. Had the driver been attacked? Kidnapped? Or worse, had they met with foul play? The thought sent a chill down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung in the air. Suddenly, I heard a rustling in the bushes nearby, and my heart leaped into my throat. I froze in place, my breath catching in my chest as I strained to listen for any sign of movement. But all was silent, save for the sound of my own pounding heart. Summoning all my courage, I slowly approached the bushes, my hands shaking with fear. Peering into the darkness, I half expected to see someone lurking there, waiting to pounce. But there was nothing, just the stillness of the night and the eerie glow of the moon overhead. Feeling a sense of relief wash over me, I took a step back from the bushes, my mind reeling with fear. It was clear that I needed to get help, and fast. Without another moment's hesitation, I turned and ran back to my car, my heart pounding in my chest as I fumbled for my phone. Dialing 911, I relayed the details of what I had found to the operator, my voice trembling with fear. They assured me that help was on the way and told me to stay put until the authorities arrived. I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me as I hung up the phone. Minutes felt like hours as I waited for the police to arrive, my eyes glued to the abandoned car as if expecting the driver to reappear at any moment. But there was no sign of them, and the sense of unease that had settled over me refused to dissipate. Finally, the sound of approaching sirens broke the silence, and I breathed a sigh of relief as the police cars pulled up beside me. They wasted no time in springing into action, scouring the area for any sign of the missing driver. After what felt like an eternity, one of the officers emerged from the darkness, leading a shaken but unharmed woman towards the waiting police cars. She explained that she had been driving home when she was attacked by a group of strangers, who had dragged her from her car and left her stranded by the side of the road. I listened in horror as she recounted her ordeal, my blood running cold at the thought of what could have happened to her. But she was safe now, thanks to the quick thinking of a passerby who had stumbled upon the abandoned car and called for help. As the police led the woman away to safety, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude wash over me. It was a terrifying ordeal, one that would haunt me for years to come. It all started innocently enough. I was driving home from work, my mind preoccupied with the usual worries and stresses of daily life. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I noticed a car following me, a beat-up old sedan, its headlights glaring in the darkness. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe they were just going the same way I was, I thought to myself. But as I turned onto a side street, the car followed, its presence growing more ominous with each passing moment. I tried to shake them off, taking a series of random turns and detours in the hopes of losing them, but no matter what I did, they stayed right behind me, like a shadow that refused to be shaken. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized I was being followed, stalked by someone who seemed to know everything about me, where I lived, where I worked, even my daily routines. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I tried to think of what to do next. Should I call the police? Drive to the nearest police station? Or would that just make things worse? In the end, I decided to keep driving, hoping against hope that I could somehow lose them and make it home safely. But as the minutes turned into hours and the miles stretched on, it became increasingly clear that they weren't going to let me go without a fight. I tried to stay calm, to focus on the road ahead and ignore the creeping sense of dread that threatened to overwhelm me. But with each passing moment, it became harder and harder to ignore the feeling that I was being watched, that every move I made was being scrutinized and analyzed by someone lurking in the shadows. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I realized that the car following me wasn't just any car, it was my own car, the same make and model, right down to the license plate. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the implications of what I was seeing. Whoever was following me wasn't just some random stalker. They were someone who knew me, someone who had access to my personal information and was using it against me. I tried to think of who it could be, an ex-boyfriend, a disgruntled coworker, a stranger with a grudge, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't come up with a single person who fit the bill. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the car vanished into thin air, leaving me alone on the deserted road. I sat there for a moment, stunned and shaken, before gathering my wits and driving home as fast as I could. When I got home, I locked all the doors and windows and called the police, but there was little they could do without any evidence. They promised to keep an eye out for any suspicious activity, but I knew deep down that I was on my own. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bed, too terrified to sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of who could have been stalking me and why. In the end, I never did find out who it was or why they were following me. I was out with my friends, just driving around and having a good time, you know? We didn't have any plans, just cruising around and enjoying each other's company. But then, out of nowhere, we heard this loud bang, like a gunshot. We all jumped, looking around to see what had happened. And that's when we saw them, a group of guys, blocking the road with their cars and brandishing weapons. They were yelling at us, telling us to get out of the car and hand over our wallets and phones. We were terrified, frozen in place as they approached us, their faces twisted with rage and aggression. We didn't know what to do, so we just did as they said, handing over our belongings and praying that they wouldn't hurt us. But then, they started yelling at us to get into their car, telling us that they were taking us with them. We didn't have a choice, so we got into their car, feeling sick to our stomachs as we realized what was happening. They drove us to this secluded spot in the middle of nowhere, far away from prying eyes. And that's when they told us their plan. They were going to rob a bank, and they were going to use us to do it. They threatened to hurt us if we didn't cooperate, so we had no choice but to go along with it. They gave us masks and guns, telling us to act natural and do exactly as they said. We were shaking with fear, but we had no choice but to go along with their plan. We drove to the bank, our hearts pounding in our chests as we realized what we were about to do. We were terrified, but we had no choice but to go through with it. We stormed into the bank, yelling at everyone to get down on the ground and hand over their money. It was chaos, with people screaming and crying all around us. But we kept going, following the gang's orders and grabbing as much money as we could carry. It felt like a nightmare, like something out of a movie. But then, just as we were about to make our escape, we heard the sound of sirens in the distance. We knew we were running out of time, so we grabbed the money and ran for it. We split up, each of us going in a different direction in hopes of escaping the police. It was every man for himself, with no thought for anyone else's safety. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest as I dodged between buildings and alleyways. I didn't stop until I was miles away from the bank, panting and out of breath. But even now, as I sit here writing this, I can't shake the feeling of guilt and shame that weighs heavy on my chest. I never wanted any of this to happen, but I was powerless to stop it. I just hope that one day, I'll be able to move on from this nightmare and put it behind me for good. But until then, I'll never forget the day that I was forced to become a criminal against my will. I was driving home late one night, the road stretching out before me like a black ribbon in the darkness. The only sound was the hum of my engine and the occasional whistle of the wind outside. I felt a sense of relief wash over me as I neared my exit, eager to finally be home after a long day at work. But as I rounded a bend in the road, my headlights illuminated something that made my blood run cold. Up ahead, a group of masked figures stood in the middle of the road, their faces hidden behind dark ski masks and their hands clutching weapons. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest as I skidded to a stop just in time. For a moment, I sat there in shock, my mind racing with fear. Who were these people, and what did they want with me? I felt a surge of panic welling up inside me as I realized that I was completely at their mercy, stranded alone on a deserted road with no one to help me. Before I could even begin to process what was happening, the masked figures began to converge on my car, their weapons glinting in the moonlight. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I realized that I needed to get out of there, and fast. With trembling hands, I fumbled for the door handle and flung open the door, leaping out of the car and bolting into the darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I sprinted down the road, the sound of my own ragged breath echoing in my ears. But the masked assailants were hot on my heels, their footsteps thundering behind me as they gave chase. I pushed myself to run faster, my muscles burning with exertion as I fought to put as much distance between myself and my pursuers as possible. As I ran, I could hear the sounds of their voices behind me, shouting and laughing as they closed in on me. I felt a surge of terror wash over me as I realized that they were gaining ground, their footsteps growing louder with each passing moment. Desperation clawed at my chest as I raced down the road, my lungs burning with exertion and my legs threatening to give up beneath me. I knew that I couldn't keep this pace up much longer, and that if I didn't find help soon, I would be at the mercy of my pursuers. But just as I felt myself starting to falter, a glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon. Up ahead, I could see the lights of a passing car, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a beacon of salvation. With renewed determination, I pushed myself to run faster, praying that whoever was inside would stop and help me. As I drew closer, I could see the driver's face illuminated in the glow of the headlights, their eyes widening in shock as they took in the scene before them. Without hesitation, they slammed on the brakes and skidded to a stop beside me, throwing open the passenger door and urging me to get in. I needed no further encouragement, diving into the car and slamming the door shut behind me as my savior hit the gas and sped away into the night. As we raced down the road, I spared a glance out the rearview window, my heart pounding in my chest as I saw the masked figures disappearing into the darkness behind us. It was a terrifying ordeal, one that would haunt me for years to come, but in the end, I had escaped with my life. I was on a long haul, driving through the night with a truckload of valuable cargo. The road was dark and empty, just me and the hum of the engine keeping me company. But then, out of nowhere, I saw them, a group of shadowy figures lurking at the side of the road. I knew right away that something was wrong. These guys weren't just out for a stroll, they were up to something, and I had a sinking feeling that I was their target. I tried to speed past them, to put as much distance between us as possible. But they were quick, darting out into the road and forcing me to slam on the brakes to avoid hitting them. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as they surrounded the truck, their faces hidden beneath dark hoods and ski masks. I knew I was in serious trouble, that I was about to come face to face with a group of ruthless thieves who would stop at nothing to get their hands on my cargo. I tried to keep my cool, to think of a way out of this mess. But before I could come up with a plan, they were climbing onto the truck, brandishing weapons and demanding that I hand over the goods. I knew I didn't stand a chance against them, not on my own. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I complied, opening up the back of the truck and letting them take whatever they wanted. As they rifled through the cargo, I felt a sense of helplessness wash over me. I was just a sitting duck, at the mercy of these criminals who were robbing me blind. But then, just as I was resigning myself to my fate, I heard the sound of approaching sirens in the distance. I felt a surge of hope flood through me as I realized that help was on the way. The thieves must have heard it too, because they hesitated, glancing nervously at each other before grabbing whatever they could carry and disappearing back into the night. I watched them go, feeling a mixture of relief and anger swirling inside me. I knew I'd narrowly escaped something truly dangerous that night, that I'd been lucky to get out of there with my life. I waited until the police arrived, telling them everything that had happened. They took my statement and promised to do everything they could to catch the thieves and bring them to justice. And as I sat there in the back of the police car, watching the lights flash by outside, I couldn't help but feel grateful to be alive, grateful to have escaped the clutches of those dangerous criminals. But even now, as I sit here writing this, I can't shake the memory of that night, the fear and uncertainty that gripped me as those thieves closed in on me. It's a feeling I'll never forget, a reminder of just how dangerous the world can be, especially when you're out there on the road all alone. I was driving home from work, the road stretching out ahead of me in the fading light of dusk. As I rounded a bend, I saw a figure standing on the side of the road, their silhouette illuminated by the headlights of passing cars. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe they were just a stranded motorist in need of help, I thought to myself. But as I drew closer, I saw something glinting in their hand, a knife, or maybe something even worse. My heart raced in my chest as I realized what I was seeing. This person wasn't stranded at all. They were waiting for someone or something, and from the look in their eyes, they weren't planning on letting me pass without a fight. I slowed down, my foot hovering over the brake pedal as I tried to think of what to do next. Should I keep driving and hope they didn't chase after me? Or should I stop and try to reason with them, even though every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get as far away from them as possible? In the end, I decided to keep driving, my eyes fixed on the road ahead as I prayed that they wouldn't come after me. But as I passed them, I saw them raise the weapon in their hand, their eyes burning with a manic intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I sped up, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to put as much distance between us as possible. But no matter how fast I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were right behind me, their gaze burning into the back of my skull like a brand. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see them chasing after me in hot pursuit. But to my relief, they were still standing by the side of the road, their figure growing smaller and smaller in the distance as I drove away. I breathed a sigh of relief as I realized that I was safe, at least for now. But as I continued on my way, the memory of their crazed expression and the glint of their weapon haunted me, filling me with a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. I tried to put the encounter out of my mind, telling myself that it was just a random encounter with a deranged individual. But deep down, I knew that there was something more to it, something dark and sinister that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I arrived home shaken but unharmed, the memory of the encounter still fresh in my mind. I locked all the doors and windows, my hands shaking as I tried to calm my racing heart. I called the police and reported what had happened, but without any concrete evidence or description of the assailant, there was little they could do. They promised to keep an eye out for any suspicious activity, but I knew deep down that I was on my own. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bed, my mind racing with thoughts of what could have happened if I hadn't managed to escape. I was driving down a desolate stretch of highway, rain pelting against my windshield like a barrage of bullets. With each passing mile, the storm seemed to grow fiercer, the wind howling like a pack of hungry wolves in the night. I knew I needed to find shelter soon, or risk being caught in the full fury of the tempest. Just when I was beginning to lose hope, I spotted a faint light up ahead, flickering like a beacon in the darkness. As I drew closer, I could make out the shape of a building looming out of the rain, its silhouette outlined against the roiling clouds overhead. It was a roadside inn, its weathered sign creaking in the wind as if welcoming me home. With a sense of relief flooding through me, I pulled into the inn's gravel parking lot and hurried inside, eager to escape the storm's wrath. The interior of the inn was dimly lit and musty smelling, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and damp earth. A bell jingled overhead as I entered, and I was greeted by the sight of a solitary figure behind the front desk. The innkeeper was a gaunt, wiry man with a face like weathered leather and eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. He welcomed me with a curt nod and directed me to a room on the second floor, assuring me that I would find everything I needed there. But as I made my way up the creaking staircase, a sense of unease began to settle over me like a thick fog. The room he had given me was small and sparsely furnished, with threadbare curtains drawn tightly over the windows. I could hear the howl of the wind outside, the sound echoing through the empty corridors like the wails of the damned. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me, and I tossed and turned restlessly in the narrow bed. It wasn't long before I began to hear strange noises coming from the hallway outside my room. Footsteps shuffled back and forth, accompanied by the soft murmur of voices speaking in hushed tones. I strained my ears, trying to make out what they were saying, but the words were lost to me, drowned out by the roar of the storm. Growing increasingly anxious, I decided to investigate, creeping out of bed and tiptoeing towards the door. I pressed my ear against the wood, listening intently for any sign of movement on the other side. Suddenly, the voices ceased, replaced by a heavy silence that seemed to press down on me like a weight. With a trembling hand, I reached for the doorknob and twisted it slowly, the hinges groaning in protest as the door swung open. What I saw on the other side made my blood run cold. The hallway was empty, the only sound the faint drip of water from a leaky pipe overhead. But as I stood there in the darkness, a sense of dread washed over me like a tidal wave. I knew I wasn't alone in the inn, knew that something sinister lurked in its shadowy corridors. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that I needed to get out of there, and fast. I hurried back to my room, throwing my belongings into my bag and making for the door. But as I reached for the handle, I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. A voice whispered in my ear, low and menacing, sending shivers down my spine. Leaving so soon, it hissed, and I whirled around to find the innkeeper standing behind me, his eyes glinting in the dim light. In that moment, I knew that I was in grave danger, that I needed to escape the inn before it was too late. With a cry of terror, I dashed out of the room and down the staircase, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the empty inn. Behind me, I could hear the innkeeper's laughter, cold and cruel, as he pursued me with unholy determination. I burst through the front doors and out into the storm, rain lashing against my face as I ran for my life. The inn loomed behind me like a malevolent specter, its windows glowing with an eerie light that seemed to follow me wherever I went. But I refused to look back, refused to let fear consume me as I raced down the darkened road. I knew that I needed to keep running, to put as much distance between myself and the inn as possible, if I had any hope of surviving the night. And so I ran, my heart pounding in my chest and my lungs burning with exertion, until at last I saw the headlights of a passing car up ahead. With a surge of relief, I flagged it down and climbed inside, the driver's face a blur of concern as he asked me what had happened. But I couldn't find the words to answer him, couldn't bring myself to relive the horrors I had witnessed in that forsaken inn. Instead, I simply clung to his hand as he drove me to safety, grateful beyond measure to be alive and free from the clutches of the darkness that had threatened to consume me. I was driving down a lonely stretch of road, the headlights of my car cutting through the darkness like a knife. It was late, and I was eager to reach my destination, but the rain was coming down in sheets, making it difficult to see more than a few feet in front of me. Suddenly, above the roar of the storm, I heard a voice calling out for help. It was faint at first, barely audible over the sound of the rain, but as I drew closer, it grew louder and more desperate. Without thinking, I slowed to a stop, my heart pounding in my chest as I scanned the darkness for the source of the voice. And then I saw her, standing by the side of the road, her figure illuminated by the glow of my headlights. She was young and beautiful, with long dark hair and eyes that seemed to shine with an otherworldly light. She was waving her arms frantically, her voice rising to a panicked shriek as she begged me to help her. Without hesitation, I flung open the door of my car and stepped out into the rain, my only thought to offer assistance to someone in need. But as I approached her, a sense of unease began to creep over me, like a cold hand closing around my heart. There was something about her, something in the way she moved, that set off alarm bells in the back of my mind. But before I could turn and run, she lunged at me with surprising speed, her hands reaching out to grab me in a vice-like grip. I tried to fight her off, to break free from her grasp, but she was stronger than she looked, her fingers digging into my flesh like talons. With a surge of adrenaline, I managed to break free from her grip and stumble backwards, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to catch my breath. But as I looked up, I realized that I was not alone. There were others emerging from the darkness, their faces twisted into grotesque masks of rage and hunger. I knew then that I had stumbled into a trap, that the woman by the side of the road was not in need of help, but was instead a lure used by some cunning predator to ensnare unsuspecting victims. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I turned and ran, my only thought to escape with my life. But they were relentless in their pursuit, their footsteps echoing through the night like the approach of some ancient evil. I ran as fast as I could, my lungs burning with exertion, but no matter how hard I tried, I could not shake them off my trail. Just when I thought I couldn't run any further, I saw the lights of a passing car up ahead, and with a surge of hope, I redoubled my efforts, pushing myself to the brink of exhaustion. The car drew closer, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a beacon of salvation, and I knew that my only chance of survival lay in reaching it before it was too late. With one final burst of energy, I threw myself towards the car, my fingers scrabbling desperately at the door handle. And then, just as I felt the hands of my pursuers closing in around me, the door swung open, and I tumbled inside, my heart pounding in my chest as the car sped away into the night. I was on a road trip with my friends, cruising down the open highway, the wind whipping through our hair as we laughed and joked together. We were young and carefree, with the whole world ahead of us, and nothing but adventure on our minds. But as the sun began to set and darkness fell over the landscape, we noticed something strange. There were no other cars on the road, no signs of life for miles around. It was as if we were the only people in the world, alone in the vast expanse of the desert. At first, we thought nothing of it, chalking it up to the remote location and the late hour. But as the minutes ticked by and the miles stretched on, a sense of unease began to settle over us, like a dark cloud hanging over our heads. And then, out of nowhere, we heard the roar of engines behind us, the sound growing louder and more menacing with each passing second. We glanced nervously at each other, our hearts pounding in our chests as we strained to see what was coming up behind us. And then we saw them, a line of sleek, black SUVs barreling down the highway towards us, their headlights cutting through the darkness like beacons of death. We tried to outrun them, to put as much distance between us and them as possible, but they were relentless in their pursuit, closing in on us with terrifying speed. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that we were being hunted, that these people were not out for a leisurely drive, but were instead on the hunt for prey. And we were their next target. I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to put as much distance between us and them as possible. But no matter how fast we drove, they were always right behind us, their headlights looming closer and closer with each passing second. And then, just when I thought we couldn't run any further, one of the SUVs pulled up alongside us, forcing us off the road and into the desert. We careened off the highway and onto the sand, our tires spinning wildly as we fought to regain control of the car. But it was too late. The SUVs had us surrounded, their headlights illuminating us like deer caught in the headlights. And then, without warning, they opened fire, their bullets tearing through the air with deadly accuracy. We ducked and swerved as best we could, but there was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. We were sitting ducks, helpless against the onslaught of bullets raining down on us from all sides. With a sense of desperation, I reached for my phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed 911 and begged for help. But the line was dead, the only response a deafening silence that seemed to stretch on for eternity. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I heard the roar of engines behind us, the sound growing louder and more menacing with each passing second. I glanced nervously at my friends, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized that help had finally arrived. With a surge of relief, we watched as a line of police cars pulled up alongside us, their sirens blaring and their lights flashing in the darkness. The SUVs tried to flee, but they were no match for the police, who chased them down with relentless determination. As the dust settled and the adrenaline began to fade, I realized that we had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. We were battered and bruised, but alive, our lives spared by the quick thinking and bravery of those who had come to our rescue. As we sat there in the darkness, surrounded by the wreckage of our car and the sound of sirens wailing in the distance, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the chance to live another day. We had survived the hunt, but the memory of that night would stay with us forever. I was driving down this desolate highway, just minding my own business, trying to get to my destination. It was one of those long stretches of road where there's nothing but open fields and empty skies all around. But then, out of nowhere, this car comes speeding up behind me, riding my tail like there's no tomorrow. I tried to ignore it at first, thinking maybe they were just in a hurry or something. But then they started flashing their headlights at me, honking their horn, and swerving back and forth like they were trying to pass me. I felt this surge of anger rising up inside me, but I tried to keep my cool and just focus on the road ahead. But they weren't letting up, no matter what I did. They kept tailgating me, getting closer and closer until I could practically see the whites of their eyes in my rearview mirror. I tried to speed up and lose them, but they just matched my pace, staying right on my bumper like they were glued there. I started to panic then, my heart racing as I realized that this wasn't just some random driver with road rage, they were out for blood. I tried to think of what to do, but my mind was blank with fear. I couldn't concentrate, couldn't focus on anything but the car behind me, getting closer and closer with each passing second. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, they pulled up beside me, matching my speed and staring at me with this intense, menacing glare. I could see the driver clearly now, their face contorted with rage as they leaned out the window and shouted something at me. But I couldn't make out what they were saying over the roar of the wind and the pounding of my heart. I tried to ignore them, to focus on the road ahead and block out the fear that was threatening to consume me. But then they did something that sent a chill down my spine. They reached out and brushed their hand against the side of my car, like they were trying to intimidate me. I felt this surge of anger and adrenaline coursing through me then, and before I knew what I was doing, I reached out and slammed on the brakes, causing them to swerve wildly and nearly crash into the guardrail. But they recovered quickly, cursing and shouting as they pulled up alongside me again, their eyes blazing with fury. I tried to keep my cool, to ignore them and focus on the road ahead. But then they did something that caught me completely off guard. They reached into their car and pulled out a gun. I felt my blood turn to ice as I realized what was happening. They were serious, deadly serious, and I was in serious trouble. I tried to speed up and get away from them, but they just matched my pace, keeping their gun trained on me as they shouted threats and obscenities. I felt this overwhelming sense of dread wash over me then, like I was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. But then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I saw something up ahead, a police car, parked on the side of the road with its lights flashing. I felt this surge of relief flood through me as I realized that help was finally here. I honked my horn and flashed my lights, trying to get the officer's attention as I pulled up alongside them. The other driver saw them too, and with one last curse, they slammed on the brakes and peeled off into the night, disappearing into the darkness without a trace. I was driving with my friends late at night, cruising down the highway, when suddenly, we heard this loud thud. It was like something had slammed into the front of the car. We all jolted in our seats, startled by the noise. I slammed on the brakes and we came to a screeching halt on the side of the road. "What was that?" one of my friends asked, their voice shaking with fear. I didn't know, but I had a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. Something didn't feel right about it. We got out of the car and walked around to the front, shining our flashlights on the road ahead. And that's when we saw it, a mangled mess of fur and blood lying in the middle of the highway. My heart sank as I realized what had happened. We'd hit an animal, and it looked like it was dead. But then, to our horror, the creature stirred. It let out this guttural groan and started to twitch, its limbs jerking spasmodically. We all froze, unsure of what to do. Should we try to help it? Or should we just leave it and call for help? Before we could make up our minds, the creature let out this blood-curdling scream, a sound that chilled me to the bone. And then it started to change, its body contorting and shifting in unnatural ways, like it was transforming into something else entirely. We stumbled back in horror, watching as the creature grew larger and more monstrous with each passing second. And then, without warning, it lunged at us, its claws outstretched and its eyes glowing with malice. We screamed and ran back to the car, scrambling inside and locking the doors behind us. But the creature wasn't done yet. It smashed into the car, pounding on the windows and trying to force its way inside. We were trapped, with nowhere to run and no way to defend ourselves. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as the creature continued its assault, its screams echoing in my ears. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we heard the sound of approaching headlights. It was another car, coming down the highway towards us. I prayed that they would see us and stop to help. And thankfully, they did. The driver slammed on the brakes and skidded to a halt beside us, jumping out of the car and running over to see what was going on. They saw the creature attacking us and wasted no time in helping us fend it off. Together, we managed to drive it away, chasing it back into the darkness where it came from. I don't know what that thing was, or why it attacked us, but I'm grateful to be alive. And as we drove away from that nightmare on the highway, I knew that I would never forget the terror of that night for as long as I lived. I was driving down this empty stretch of road in the dead of night, just trying to get home after a long day at work. The only thing keeping me company was the hum of the engine and the occasional flicker of the streetlights passing by. But then, out of nowhere, I saw it, a figure standing on the side of the road, illuminated by the glow of the headlights. It was tall and shadowy, with long, flowing robes that billowed in the wind. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that it wasn't just some random person standing there. It was something else entirely, something unnatural. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that was creeping over me, telling myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that something wasn't right. I sped up, trying to put some distance between me and the figure on the side of the road. But no matter how fast I went, it seemed like it was always right there behind me, just out of reach. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw it, the figure, still standing there on the side of the road, its eyes boring into mine with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to focus on the road ahead, to block out the fear that was threatening to consume me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, that there was something out there, lurking in the darkness, just waiting to strike. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I drove on, the fear gnawing at me like a relentless predator. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I saw it, the figure, standing in the middle of the road, blocking my path. I slammed on the brakes and skidded to a halt, my heart racing as I stared at the figure in disbelief. It was like something out of a nightmare, this spectral figure standing there in the darkness, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. I didn't know what to do. Should I try to drive around it? Or should I just sit there and wait for it to go away? But before I could make up my mind, the figure started to move, slowly, deliberately, like it was stalking its prey. I felt a surge of panic rising up inside me as it got closer and closer, its eyes locked on mine with a fierce intensity that sent chills down my spine. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I heard a voice that cut through the darkness like a beacon of light. It was the voice of reason, urging me to stay calm and keep my wits about me. And as I listened to it, I felt this overwhelming sense of clarity wash over me. I knew then that I had to do something, that I couldn't just sit there and let this thing terrorize me any longer. So, with a newfound determination, I put the car in reverse and gunned the engine, speeding away from the figure with all the speed and force I could muster. I didn't stop until I was miles away, safe and sound, with the figure nothing but a distant memory fading into the night. But even now, as I sit here writing this, I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, waiting for me, biding its time until it can strike again. I don't know what it wants from me, or why it's chosen me as its target. But one thing's for sure, I won't rest easy until I know that it's gone for good, banished back to whatever dark corner of the world it came from. We were driving down the highway, my family and I, enjoying the road trip and the sights passing by outside the windows. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the landscape, and we were making good time towards our destination. But then, without warning, everything changed. One moment, the sky was clear and the road was illuminated by the fading light of the sun, and the next, It was like someone had flipped a switch and plunged us into darkness. It happened so suddenly that I barely had time to react, my hands tightening on the steering wheel as I struggled to see through the blackness. I glanced nervously at my family, their faces pale in the dim light of the dashboard. My wife reached out and clutched my hand, her fingers trembling with fear. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. I didn't have an answer for her. All I knew was that something was very wrong, and that we needed to get off the road as quickly as possible. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking as I tried to navigate the screen in the darkness. But when I tried to call for help, there was no signal, no response from the outside world. We were completely alone, stranded on a deserted highway with no other vehicles or signs of life in sight. The darkness pressed in around us, suffocating and oppressive, like a weight on my chest that I couldn't shake off. I tried to keep calm, to reassure my family that everything would be okay, but inside, I was terrified. I had no idea what was happening or how to fix it, and the fear of the unknown was eating away at me, gnawing at my insides like a hungry animal. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard it. A sound, faint at first, but growing louder and more menacing with each passing second. It was like a low, guttural growl, echoing through the darkness and sending shivers down my spine. I glanced nervously out the window, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to see what was coming for us. But there was nothing there, nothing but empty darkness stretching out into infinity. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, to convince myself that it was just my imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew that something was out there, lurking in the shadows and waiting to strike. We drove on in silence, the tension in the car thick enough to cut with a knife. Every creak and groan of the engine sent a jolt of fear through me, and I found myself glancing nervously over my shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking in the darkness behind us. But there was nothing there, nothing but the empty expanse of the highway stretching out into the night. It was as if we had entered another world, a world where the rules of reality no longer applied and anything was possible. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, to focus on the road ahead and get us to safety. But as the minutes ticked by and the darkness closed in around us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was waiting for us just beyond the edge of the headlights. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the engine sputtered and died, leaving us stranded in the middle of nowhere with no way to escape. My heart sank as I realized that we were completely at the mercy of whatever was out there in the darkness. I glanced nervously at my family, their faces pale and drawn in the dim light of the dashboard. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to find help." But even as the words left my lips, I knew that it was futile. There was no help coming, no rescue waiting just around the corner. We were alone, stranded on a deserted highway with no way out. I opened the door and stepped out into the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest as I scanned the horizon for any sign of life. But there was nothing there, nothing but empty darkness stretching out in every direction. I turned back to the car, my hands trembling as I reached for the flashlight in the glove compartment. But when I flicked it on, the beam of light revealed nothing but empty darkness, swallowing up everything in its path. I took a deep breath and tried to calm my racing heart, to focus on finding a way out of this nightmare. But as I turned back to the road, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, standing in the middle of the highway, was a figure. It was tall and shadowy, its features obscured by the darkness, but there was something unmistakably human about it. I froze in terror, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. But before I could react, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but a lingering feeling of dread. I stumbled backwards, my heart pounding in my chest as I struggled to catch my breath. My family was watching me, their faces pale and drawn with fear. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice shaking with fear. "We need to run." And without another word, we turned and fled into the darkness, the sound of our footsteps echoing through the empty expanse of the highway as we raced to escape whatever horrors lay waiting for us in the night. We ran, our footsteps pounding against the pavement, echoing through the darkness as we raced to escape the unknown terror that lurked in the shadows. My heart was pounding in my chest, adrenaline coursing through my veins as we pushed ourselves to keep going, to put as much distance between us and whatever had haunted us on that deserted highway. I could feel the panic rising within me, threatening to overwhelm my senses as we fled into the night. But I forced myself to focus, to keep moving forward, knowing that our only chance of survival lay in putting as much distance between us and whatever was out there in the darkness. We ran for what felt like hours, our breath coming in ragged gasps as we pushed ourselves to the brink of exhaustion. But still, the darkness seemed to stretch out endlessly before us, the road disappearing into the night with no end in sight. And then, just when I thought we couldn't go on any longer, I saw it. A faint glow in the distance, barely visible through the darkness, but unmistakably real. It was the lights of a small town, a beacon of hope in the vast expanse of the night. I felt a surge of relief flood through me, washing away the fear and exhaustion as we stumbled towards the lights, our legs aching with every step. But even as we drew closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching us, waiting for us to let our guard down. We reached the edge of town just as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the streets and alleyways. I breathed a sigh of relief as we stumbled into the safety of the town, the darkness of the highway fading away behind us like a bad dream. We found help soon after, a kind stranger who took us in and offered us shelter for the night. And as we sat huddled together in the warmth of their home, surrounded by the comforting glow of lamplight, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the simple joys of safety and companionship. But even as we tried to put the events of that night behind us, I knew that the memory would stay with us forever, a reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of our perception. And as I lay down to sleep, my family safe beside me, I said a silent prayer of thanks to whatever forces had guided us through the darkness, knowing that we were lucky to have escaped with our lives.